Origins Home Reaction. This is why did Britain hand over Hong Kong to China? Well, channel History Matters. Here's another History Matters video. Why did Britain hand over Hong Kong? Because it's a matter of principle. Because it's in their blood. They're just proud people who just said that before 21st century arrives, we're going to give back, Hong Kong to China. No, that's not it. Okay, so maybe because they probably had no choice. This is by the, I guess, end of the British Empire. I'm guessing. Around this time, China was becoming, obviously, in the late 20th century, China was becoming more and more economical partner to everybody around the world. It was the place to make money, apparently, right? For it was partner to Britain for a long time, even during the opiate wars. So basically, if I were to guess, they probably made some kind of a deal with them. That would benefit them, business-wise or something, because they knew empire is going away, right? So in the future, going forward, they made some kind of deal that would benefit them, some kind of economical deal. I don't know, exclusive deals or something. I don't know. That must be it. Because otherwise, the situation would be like Argentina, right? Like what happened with Argentina. That would be the similar situation here. But it didn't happen because probably something like that. I don't know. I don't know if there is more detail to it, but I'm guessing it could be that, right? That's how usually these historical events go. So let's watch it. Remember, if you like my reaction, do like, subscribe. Check out the reaction there's a link in the description. And yeah, let's watch it.
The handover of Hong Kong from British control to the People's Republic of China in 1997 is considered by many to mark the formal end of the British Empire. As many of you will know, Britain had acquired the island and the lands around it during the Opium Wars against China. In 1842, Britain gained Hong Kong.
British Empire, yes, it was quite impressive. It was literally the biggest empire there ever was, so it was more than just impressive.
In 1860 added Kowloon and Stonecutters Island to its possessions, and in 1898 Britain took out a 99-year lease on these lands too. Unlike the leased territories, Hong Kong and Kowloon were done so in perpetuity, and there was no legal requirement for Britain to return these lands to China. Which raises the question, why did Britain also hand over Hong Kong in 1997? First, a bit of context. Japan had briefly occupied Hong Kong during the Second World War, and whilst Britain had gotten it back from them in 1945, there was no guarantee that they'd keep it. After the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949 with a communist victory, there were concerns that it would invade, yet this never happened. Britain had hoped that the communist regime would eventually collapse and that the Republic of China, now solely in control of Taiwan, would end up running the country. As the Cold War progressed, the communist government's position became much more secure, whereas Britain...
Why would Communist Party collapse, and how would the Republic that is in Taiwan would take over? How is that going to happen? Did they think that people are just going to be fed up and revolt against communist system? Is that what they thought at the time? And the Taiwanese government will just basically be the Democratic Republic government? Yeah. Obviously, China is basically, was not that much of an economical power, and for all around it wasn't, progressive in that way, right? Usually comes wealth brings up progressiveness, right? Where people like, we need rights, this and that. In China, Communist Party came. They basically, enacted lots of their, communist ideas. Everywhere suppression was big, right? We have this infamous, the tank image of one guy standing there. So of course there's going to be, protests, but by the time all that happens, government is going to be a really powerful entity. Military is going to be a really powerful entity. By that point, most of protest is not going to work, right? Protest has to be very early. And for that, country has to be progressive. China, obviously, like we know, through games like Hearts of Iron 4, we already know that China wasn't that powerful during the world wars, right? Because it wasn't that big. Right? Same thing with India. It wasn't that economical powerhouse. It became economical powerhouse under the Communist Party, so it was never going to happen.
Britain's international position declined as its empire disintegrated. As the end of the 99-year lease approached, Britain's previous position of "we don't deal with communists" became much more untenable. When Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in 1979, she had very little choice except to engage with the Beijing government. The two positions both sides took were pretty clear. China wanted it all back in 1997, and that was final. Britain was content to hand back the new territories, but wished to continue administering Hong Kong with Chinese permission. China said no. Negotiations between both sides were pretty heated at points, with the Chinese Premier Deng Xiaoping telling Thatcher that he could simply invade and conquer the island anytime he wanted to, and there would be nothing that she could do about it. One avenue of potential compromise was Portugal, or more specifically the Portuguese colony of Macau, which Britain believed could act as an example. Macau was, during the Cold War, still administered by Portugal, but only with Chinese consent. At points, this idea was floated by and rejected by both sides because it did little more than kick the can down the road. To make matters slightly more complicated, there were many protests across the colony against continued British rule. Some of these were pro-Beijing communist protests which were organised by trade unions with the ultimate goal of rejoining China. Some were simply protests which demanded greater autonomy as well as more democratic rights, whilst also making it clear that they didn't think that Maoism sounded like fun. Furthermore, Britain and also China were faced by what's known as the Hong Kong Man. The Hong Kong Man was the manifestation of Hong Kong nationalism and the notion that the people there weren't British and they also weren't Chinese, but instead were their own people with their own way of life. It was this movement which occurred in the wake of the Tiananmen Square crackdown, which saw Britain introduce wide-sweeping democratic reforms in the colony. In the end, though, the clock was ticking, China was patiently waiting, and Britain had to decide what was going to happen to Hong Kong proper and its people when the lease of the territories expired. Thus, Thatcher and the British government were left with only one option: retreat from China, since there was no hope of them retaining it under any circumstances. As such, Britain conceded to China's demands and pledged to return the island to China, but in doing so they wanted certain guarantees. In the end, China agreed to maintain Hong Kong's capitalist economic system and its people's rights and privileges.
Yep, there you go. See, I knew it. First of all, the simple thing is here. If they are just gonna go to your face and tell you that we're gonna just take it by force, by that point they have become much bigger for you to control. At this point, British cannot contain China at all, right? If they really wanted to, they could cause a war and actually take over Hong Kong, right? I mean, it would be easy for them since they're just there, and British would have a hard time fighting. They were at that level by then, right? So at this point, you have nothing but, just to promise that we won't cause any problem, only if you, keep certain economical things like capital system, like he said, just business. We profit, you profit, that's how it works. It kind of makes sense.
For at least 50 years, and for Britain this was frankly as much as it was ever going to get. After the Second World War and the decline of British influence, the future of Hong Kong was decided in Beijing, not London. The Chinese government had to do nothing but wait for 1997 to come around, whilst making it clear that all of Britain's territories in the region would be returned. Britain could neither negotiate any continuation of sovereignty, nor could it defeat a power half a world away. And in the end, Britain handed over Hong Kong for one simple reason: it had no choice.
There you go.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching, with extra thanks to my patrons that you see on screen now. And a special thanks to James Bizanet.
Yep, there we go. Kind of see that coming, right? Why did Britain hand over Hong Kong? Because they had no choice. By then, China was really powerful. We saw how much protest happened in Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong was always a British colony up until the very recent, like 2 decades ago. And it just became an issue then, right? Like it grew up under Britain. It had really Western progressive, thing to it, and then it had to join China, which everybody was not happy about. I don't know if they wanted to be British or not, but like he said, they wanted to be their own entity. Of course, China's not gonna go for that. And yeah, there you go. I don't know if how many friction is going to be in the future, right? A few years ago, there was a massive level protest there. I think, every few years it's just going to go up and up. I don't know what's going to happen there, but yeah. Alright, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe. Check out the reaction, there's a link in the description. And yeah, I'll see you next time.